All right. So I'm your guest. I am not in Indiana. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm joining you from my house, like everyone does these days. And today we're going to talk about how I learned to stop worrying and love doing less. So one of the things so I've been working in like free and open source software for about 15 years, and one of the things I've noticed is that um, people have loads and loads of ideas, which is great. Like we wouldn't really get anything done. Like you're kind of making software out of nothing, and so lots of ideas is really great. But I've also noticed there's like kind of two types of thinkers, and there's like official words for this. Divergent thinkers are people that kind of come up with like 20 different solutions to any given problem, and so they're always like coming up with more things. And I'm a divergent thinker. It's like to the point where like if my husband and I are in a city we haven't been in before, like we'll be like, okay, we can only look at like 3 more menus and then we have to pick, because like we can't just keep generating more ideas, because otherwise it's gonna be midnight and we won't have eaten. And there are a lot of folks like that. It's that just generate lots and lots of ideas. And I usually have to warn people when I work with them, like, hey, I'm not necessarily attached to all 20 of the ideas I just shared, just so you know. And then there are other folks that are more like what you call convergent thinkers. So their thinking process is like, let's get to like a good solution quickly and then move on it and go for it. And you can see that there are obviously like pros and cons to both kinds of thinking. Like sometimes your answer A and your answer B both are not great. And so you have to generate some more ideas. And that's awesome. And sometimes it's just like, hey, it's the brainstorming has to stop. We just have to get something done. And most free and open source software projects have a couple of folks from each type, or like companies are the same. So you end up like with a mix mash of folks, which is great, unless you don't have good boundaries and you sort of end up with the worst of both kinds of thinking happening at the same time. And you sometimes see projects like this. They're like heading down the highway 90 miles an hour. They have taken on board every single idea, like hundreds of ideas, and they're going to just like move forward on executing every single one of them.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Um,
I don't think your slides are moving.
oh no. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay. Yeah, how do I get it to do in the okay.
Might be view and present.
Yeah. So I have this like, but then this didn't change.
No, it's still showing the edit mode.
Okay.
If you hit the share screen, I think it'll let you pick which window you want to share.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
All right. So new share. Okay. Oh. All right. Let's try this. Do you guys get the flowers on the motorcycle now?
Looks like this will work.
Yep. Okay. And then so that was the other one, but now they're moving, right?
Yes, they are.
Perfect. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, so once you get like folks that are like have all the exciting ideas and then folks that just want to execute on stuff, you end up with this like situation where you're executing on everything all at once, which you can see that would be less than ideal. So then you want to try and figure out how to start trimming. And this is hard, but the first step, like many things, is admitting that you have a problem. And when you feel like you're that person on a motorcycle, like, covered in stuff and can't even see where you're going and overburdened with things, once you admit there are too many things happening, then you can start looking at what to trim. And the thing is like, you don't want to not trim. Like maybe you are sort of like, ooh, last week was terrible, but like maybe this week we'll be able to handle going forward with a bazillion things, because like think of all we'll get done. I would say don't do that, because when folks are overloaded and doing too many things at any given time, they're more prone to making mistakes. They're more prone to burnout. And when people get burnt out, they leave, and that's terrible. But worse, they might get burnt out and stay. And then you end up with a lot of grumpy people that make mistakes and are really angry and defensive about it inside of your open source project or your company or whatever it is. You don't want that. Trust me. I've been there. You definitely don't want that. So the first step on figuring out what to trim is trying to like identify what is core. And if you don't already know that, it might, then it's not a bad thing to do like a strategic planning process or have like a, like a once yearly meeting where you set goals for the year or something like that. But if you sort of know what core is already, you can kind of then like that illuminates what isn't core, right? And that's going to be different for every single project. One of the projects that I work on is Seagull, the Seattle New Life Fest. Have a couple folks in the audience that have attended, and it's a small event out in Seattle. This year, obviously, was virtual, but our second year of operation, we were thinking, oh, it would be really nice to thank our speakers and our volunteers for participating and doing all this free work because we don't really pay people to speak there and stuff like that, or we definitely don't pay people to sit at the registration desk and because it's a community run conference. Someone mentioned t-shirts, and then we are all like, the event's in like maybe 2.5, 3 months. T-shirts. Who's interested in designing t-shirts? Finding a manufacturer with inclusive sizing that can print our design without like it being, a $30 t-shirt, and then go and get sizes from all of our volunteers and all of our speakers, get them all into the manufacturer, figure out what we have to buffer for the people that didn't give us the sizes and the ones that are just going to walk away or whatever for some of the popular sizes, and then get them all back in. Literally nobody wanted to do that, which is actually fine, because as I said, we're a small community conference bringing people together to talk about tech and how to find your way into like free and open source software, how to like, get a job, how to meet people who are part of the community in the Seattle area. And so our mission is not to make t-shirts for people. So t-shirts are not core. So we thought about this and we were like, well, we do still want to thank people and we do still want to provide something that they can, wear out in the world or take out in the world and promote us. But what if we went with a one size fits all gift? Like, we've never looked back. Every gift that we've ever done for the Seattle New Linux Fest has been a one size fits all gift from then on. So it's like you order a couple, there's no sizes whatsoever. We don't have to ask people. We don't have to have conversations about like, are they trim cut or are they baggy cut? Like we never have to have those conversations, and we've never looked back. People have loved the scarves, the utensil kits, the cord organizers, the stretchy one size fits all gloves that have the little capacitance on the fingers and stuff like that. So it's like we just took it off our plate because we weren't a t-shirt delivery system. And if you think about it, I mean, there like a lot of folks do t-shirts, but you don't have to. Like they're like people have shirts. Like it's great to work in tech. Usually you have a couple of shirts already, and you're not obligated to do that just because lots of folks are doing it. So that may help you think about like some of the things that you can trim from your project. Like, oh, do we do this thing just because like everybody does it, or because we did it at our last project or at our last company? Do we really need to do it here? Is it like a good use of our time? Another thing that I would say is going to help you like kind of trim up that overload of tasks and time and such is to do better retrospectives, like with an eye to time. So when you talk about a task, not just saying like, did it work? Did we finish? Did we achieve the, goal? Looking at the investment of time and saying, how many hours did we spend on this? How much of like somebody's whole quarter was working on this particular thing? Like, and was that worth it? Like, is that a good like return on our time investment? So asking those questions in your retrospectives is going to help you kind of like, oh, like I kind of, especially if you have like a team and people don't complain, there's like, oh yeah, I just put in like 3 80-hour work weeks, like trying to get that finished because you all said it was part of the thing we needed to do. And then it's like, oh, and now you're gonna like leave the company, or you're gonna like take a month off, or you hate us and whatever. It's like this was not a good time investment, perhaps. Or maybe it is, and maybe it should be 2 people or 3 people instead of just one. So another thing that I think can help, like sort of getting a grip on your time stuff, is a pilot program. So sometimes, like someone suggests a new idea, and it sounds okay. It sounds like, oh, that could be good, but to do it as a pilot with parameters and say, hey, let's try this idea, but only, let's only spend like 10 hours on it. And if we can't get it over the hump in 10 hours, then let's look again and see if we're close, or if it's going to be like a sunk cost thing, or it's going to be like another 40 hours for this very small thing that is actually not that important. The other thing is, like, maybe you're adding stuff like, oh, let's do a weekly Q&A in our channel where people can come by and ask us questions about our software, and maybe only one person shows up. So like at the end of doing a pilot for like 2 months, you might think, ooh, well, that was many hours of one person's time, and maybe only 1 or 2 people showed up. And so, so you can talk about, like, was that a good investment of time? And if it's not, then you stop. This is important. The part where you make sure that, like, part of the pilot is like, it's not really a pilot if you just add stuff on and then never go back and examine whether it was a good idea. And then the other thing you can do is, like, if you're like, oh, people liked it, but they didn't, maybe we can decrease the frequency, or we can like make it a special occasion thing, or we can be explicit that it's like a fun add-on and not like a thing we're committed to doing like on any particular cadence. And that's fine. You don't, just because something was fun once doesn't mean that like then you have to start doing it every week or every month or whatever it is. So that one, okay. So let's talk about pulling back gracefully. So that's like trimming as you're kind of thinking about, like, what are we doing? How are we looking at our work in our episodic ways? But sometimes you're like committed to a bunch of things and you want to uncommit, honestly. Because it's like, I mean, time is, well, it's finite, despite how bendy and weird it looks here. And lots of people were pretty overcommitted before the pandemic, but then you have like a few less spoons and a few less like bits of energy, and maybe a few more demands on your time. And like maybe now, if you're working at home and you weren't before, your boss expects you to kind of like just answer emails at like 2 in the morning. So time has become ever more precious than it was before, and it was precious before. So the thing, it's, of course, there are like never any guarantees that that the amount of time you have to give to a project or the amount of time you have to spend at work will remain the same. Like literally nobody is ever exempt from having their partner get sick, or having to move on short notice because like a tree fell on their house or something like that. Like there are all these things that could happen. Someone gets sick, you have to plan a funeral, which is a super bummer. But there are no guarantees, and the longer you live, the less likely you are to escape without having any major disruption of your time availability. And I say this not to bum you out and like meditate on the mortal coil and the finiteness of human existence, but more to say, like, you want to pull back, have some perspective. Like maybe you don't want to spend all your time at work, and maybe you want to make sure that you're spending some of your time doing other things so that you have leeway for some of the other stuff when it does come up. The other thing that I think is really great about perspective is that it kind of allows you to sort of see your work in a different light. So I'm sure people remember this stupendously dumb machine that created a Capri Sun, basically, but with a machine to punch the straw for you. And this is one of those things where I think it's like, oh, this is an example of folks who should have left the office, turned off the computer, not thought about software for a couple of days, and just hung out with friends who would be like, what are you working on? And then someone could say like, oh, that's a bus. And now you're working on a Capri Sun with a fancy machine to put straw in. That's weird. So it's like, and this is the funnier parts. Like there are some other things that are really key for perspective. Um, People create these algorithms that have like a sexist or racist impact, like, oh, let's just like model our resume gathering on previous resume gathering. And it's like, well, that's a really good way to make sure we replicate the last decade's racism and sexism for like the next couple of decades. Not so great. Or things where maybe you work in an office where almost everybody is male, and you're like, oh yeah, I just thought it would be really good if your friends could see where you are so they could come swing by and check up on you and say hi and ask why you aren't coming home to clean the house anymore, etc. Like it's you owe it to yourself to take yourself out of your work a little bit and have some perspective on what you're doing so that you don't build in things that are kind of like look really no brainer to people that are not like you. And you can't take that time for a perspective if you don't have any time to take. So let's talk about paring down your tasks. So occasionally, and this happens to me sometimes, if past you has signed you up, like current you up for something that you're going to resent doing, then you should respectfully decline. It's actually okay to say like, hey, I'm super overloaded and I committed to that thing, but I'm sorry I cannot. There are ways to do it a little better than just like, sorry, I don't have time for that. Kind of just saying like, I have taken on more than I can handle this month, so I won't be able to do whatever it was you asked me to do. And then the other thing is you want to be honest with people. So if you find yourself like, you're like, oh, I'm heading towards this deadline and I know it's not going to land. To let people know like, hey, this deadline is not going to land. Like I encountered an unexpected amount of complexity, or I had some personal stuff, or I was waiting on another piece from like one of our collaborators and they just sent it to me yesterday. Whatever it is, be honest as soon as you possibly can. If you can, try and offer like a path forward. So you might say, I could do half of it on time if that's useful. It depends on how the task is arranged. Like sometimes that's not a useful offer. Or you could say like, I could do the whole thing for you on, but it'll be a week late. And that's, so you say that. Or if you're like, oh, I was gonna show up and do this talk or this presentation or this training, I can't do it, but can I suggest someone else? So you want to like, if you like helpfully offer a path forward as opposed to just say like, sorry, I'm not doing it. You can see like it is going to be a little more graceful and it's going to go down a little easier if you offer a path forward. And this happened at Media Goblin. So one of the projects that I worked on, it's a decentralized media hosting project. I'm no longer the maintainer, but we had this great idea that we're going to build a decentralized media hosting service that would like host any kind of media regardless of type. So you would have like your ASCII art and your videos and your songs and your poems and your drawings and everything all in one aggregated media place. And it would be decentralized, like a federated social network system. So we did some crowdfunding for this, and we were like, here's what we're gonna do. And we thought like each of these things would maybe take approximately similar amount of time, or the thing that we didn't know is that federation actually turned out to be like 500 different little pieces. We're like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this thing and it's gonna land by the end of next year. And then we got into the federation. There's so much in there. It's like the stuff that large centralized medias and social networks do, like for spam, for like all this kind of like traffic management and different stuff behind the scenes. We didn't know until we got in there, and then we got in there and we're like, oh no. So we had to tell people like, hey, this is going to take longer than we thought, and here is why. And we were really honest. We were like, here's what we've done so far. Here's what we found out about the part that is going to take a whole lot longer and why it's going to take a whole lot longer. We still think it's important to do, but we like updated our supporters. So that's the meeting on the story. The next thing, I don't have like a slide preview, so I've forgotten what the next one is in some places. But meetings are, we all do meetings. There are so many meetings. One of the things that's interesting about meetings is that if you go to a lot of them, you end up with a lot of to-do items. Like if you fully participate in a meeting, then it's really hard to get out of that meeting without taking on a to-do item, especially if people know who you are and what you do and what you're good at. Like they'll be like, oh yeah, like Ben could totally translate that into Latin for us. And then everyone's looking at you and it's really hard to say like, I have forgotten all the Latin, don't sign me up for that. So meetings are this, they themselves take up a bunch of time. And then if you go to a lot of them, you end up with a lot of to-do items. Now, of course, there are meetings that you have to go to, but you want to make sure that you keep it like a pretty closely cropped circle around your core work. If this is you preparing for 19 meetings because they all have different things going on and different agendas, different items, they're not at all related, and you have to read up on them before you attend them each, then you probably have too many meetings. So it's, you know, and they can come in a lot of ways. Like sometimes it's like, it feels nice to be invited and you're like, oh yeah, okay. Or like someone else on your team is like, oh, I'd like to go to that meeting. It sounds fun. They're usually not that fun. You could tell them like, why don't you attend and then update me instead, which is a good way. You shouldn't have two people going to the same meeting from your organization unless it's like really core mission. So the thing about like getting invited to meetings that are of like marginal interest to you is that eventually you end up like attending like more meetings. Like the more marginal interest to you meeting you get invited to, the more invitations roll in for like related stuff, because you know people want you to come to the meeting, sign up to do work, and fill up your time with like tasks that they would like someone else to do. So you should really crop down your meeting schedule and look at like, is this part of our core mission? Is this part of our core goal? Are they making decisions here that are going to have us like a significant material impact on our work? If not, then maybe don't go. You can read the minutes, or maybe like if you have a friend that attends the meeting because it's a little more like on topic for them, say like, hey, if y'all ever get to the Docker implementation part, let me know, I'll attend that meeting or something. So trying to get too far out with your meetings, because then you're focusing on like hundreds of things, and that's not good. So those are some of the ways that you like get rid of some of the tasks that you already have on your plate. But then how do you preemptively choose to do less going forward once you've already gotten all these things off your plate? And a big piece for that one is redundancy. So if your project or your organization has lots of things that only one person knows how to do, then that person, if any of those things are important, they're not allowed to go on vacation. They're not allowed to leave the office. They're not allowed to like split a big, you know, can of worms that blows up and has to be dealt with immediately with another person because nobody else knows how to do it. So if you build in redundancy where two people know, like, what do we do when the server goes down? Two people know, like, who do we contact when we think we've had a security breach? Like, have two people know all those really key, important, time-sensitive things in your organization or your project so that you can go ahead and task whoever actually has time for it or split it up. And it allows you to plan to be nice. So if someone's like, oh, I was gonna go to my brother's wedding this weekend, you want to be able to be like, yeah, no, it's cool. The other person who knows all the critical stuff is not going to your brother's wedding this weekend, so we're all right. Or like, oh, I have to go, like my kids are sick, I gotta go home. It's like, yeah, go ahead and do that. Like you want to be able to tell people like, can I pass on this one and have someone else do it this time? Especially if you're working with people who are volunteers. which, for some open source projects, that's the case. All right. So I don't know how many Star Trek fans we have here today, because, there's only so many of us here. But another thing, like if you watch the original Star Trek, Scotty is the king of doing this thing where he overestimates the amount of time that a task is going to take. And I highly recommend this. So like Captain Kirk would be like, hey, I need you to do this thing, like fix this thing, like change the calibration of the long range scanners, whatever. And Scotty would be like, that's going to take me 30 hours. And the captain would come back and be like, I need it in 2. And so somehow he would get it done in 2. So I think he was buffering a lot. I don't necessarily recommend that you buffer quite that much, but you should buffer the time estimates that you give for finishing tasks to people at least a little bit. I would say if the task has a lot of like outside inputs, like outside collaborators that you're going to have to get information from or input from, and it's new, and like like you're building a thing that you haven't built before, then you might want to put 30% on that. So it's like, oh, maybe you think 5 weeks, just say 8. And then if it comes in early, awesome. If it doesn't, then, whatever. Oh, the light's changing. Now I'm like Satan over here.
It's funny that you said 30% and then immediately quoted 60%, because I would say buffer that by 50 or more.
It depends on the complexity. If you're like, oh, I have all of those types of complexity, then yes. Hang on. I'm going to turn on another light so I'm not like weird in the red here. Okay. All right. And then, obviously for stuff that you've done a million times, you might only need to put a 10 or 15% buffer there. But I promise that you will never regret having the extra time. Like you'll never be like, shoot, like I finished early. What am I going to do? Leave work on a Friday afternoon and go spend it doing something fun? No, you'll never regret that, I promise. Another thing that can kind of eat up time in a way that people don't think about is getting like the wrong person for the job. And this is like, especially like volunteer organizations tend to do this. So like it was a friend of mine asked me to help her with her nonprofit. She said, oh, I need help with fundraising. She didn't actually need help with fundraising. Her database was a mess. It was like a bunch of like incompatible data all pasted in different ways, and she needed a database administrator. And I was like, so I'm not actually a database administrator, and I could do this, but it'd be like one record at a time, and you said you were going to pay me like consultant rates by the hour, so you should not pay me to redo your data entry. Like you should find someone who does database administration to fix this for you. You have like a database administration problem, not a fundraising problem. And I've seen this in lots of different like organizations, like, people are kind of looking around like, someone's got to figure out how taxes in Minnesota work. And like, if you stare at people long enough, someone will be like, oh, I guess I'll do it. It's going to take them forever if it had never occurred to them. They don't know anything about tax law. Don't do that. You end up like kind of running people's enthusiasm down and using up their time really inefficiently. Like if someone is part of your project because they're really good at scripting, like for the Django database, then you shouldn't have them also like spending another like 4 full days figuring out how taxes work in Minnesota. So getting the right person for the right job. It also usually yields a better result. I don't know if you've ever seen like graphic, like kind of outreach materials designed by say lawyers or people that have never used any kind of graphical software, but the result is not as good. So I would say get the right person for the right job because they're going to be faster at the thing that needs doing. All right. And then the other way that you can preemptively like get, stuff that you don't need to do off your list is to look at what is key and what is nice to have. So like you may be like, yeah, that would be awesome, but perhaps this would be completely sufficient. And that's like, then you know what you can put off and what you can take off the list of things to do. And so for software projects, like, oh, our next release, like that's key, or repairing the security vulnerability that is letting people's data wander out into the world, that's key. Maybe if you're running like an event, then making sure that your budget is accurate is key, so that you don't spend money you don't have. Some of the things that might not be key is like, oh, that person who came by once and opened a bug, saying that he would like us to change one thing on our code like last year that nobody else is that interested in, not key. Translating your entire project into like a language, like a spoken language that literally nobody who uses your software is interested in, also not key. And for events, sometimes people are like, let's have a welcome breakfast, and it's like, we don't have any more people. Like, if someone wants to self-organize, go for it. But really paring down like what's key and what's not key. Of course, these examples are a little extreme. It's going to get a little bit trickier as you get to the middle, where you're like, that sounds kind of nice, like making the thing a little more modular. I mean, that sounds kind of good, like, but do we need to do it right now? So the part that's probably the most important is that you can only have so many key things. Like, if you're like, this is key, and you go through your pile of what's key and what's not key, and there's like only one thing that's not key and everything else is key, either you're doing a great job already of paring down your tasks, or you need to go back to that list and start it again. So I'm going to kind of recap, and then we can kind of just chat, because it's a small group, about like things that you've seen, or like things that you have something you're dealing with that you would want advice on, and we can hang out. But the breathing room and perspective is super, super important. People, when they have breathing room, they can be nicer. They're not mad at new contributors for asking questions. They have time to document stuff. They have time to ask, to answer questions about what they're doing, so that other people can understand what the process is, and where they are in the process, and when that process is about to get handed off to the next person, et cetera, et cetera. So those are really, like, you want people to feel like relaxed enough to take the time to talk about what they're doing a little bit, without feeling like defensive and overloaded and like panicked because the speed of everything is too much. And then the perspective is also really important for lots of reasons. If you won't do it for your own personal health and well-being, then do it for the project, so that you don't end up with some kind of like racist juicero thing that you're embarrassed about later. The other thing I would say is that if you can trim down the tasks and give people a manageable amount of things to do, then they're going to stick around. I think people that are not overloaded, like, I think they sleep better. They're less likely to burn out. They're less likely to leave your project and go somewhere else, because it's really manageable for them. So you have these people that are excited about your project or your community, and you want to treat them well, so that they want to stay around, and they want to, be, working towards your common goals for a long time. And I would say also, don't forget to include yourself in that key contributor that you should treat well, and allow to have time, to take time off, and to, have some breathing room and some perspective, and like, the ability to work a reasonable amount of hours without too much panicky deadlines on their plate, so that they can, so you can sleep as well. So I have credits for the pictures, and then I would be happy to take questions.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
Where are you going to post the recording PowerPoint link? Again, I'm doing this for the assignment, so.
Oh yeah, I don't know. That's a question for Garrett. Hold on.
We have, so we post things on YouTube, and if you want to give us a link, we can upload that as well.
Sure.
That will be a comment on this particular meetup, this particular meeting. So you'll get a notification once we post that.
Yeah. Can you send me the link, please, so I can, because because I am not a good, I'm not a good fast listener. So I'm just, just replaying the link. So replaying to you.
I totally get it. I just recorded 7 hours of meetings I had last Thursday and Friday, so I can go over them again. I get to go through 15 hours of the same 7 hours of meetings. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So are you gonna are you are you gonna send the PowerPoint a recorded PowerPoint? Oh, I see it. I see it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's the link to our channel.
Yes. Thanks, Garrett.
Yep.
So to say, Deb, I feel very called out by all your examples of what not to do. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I know sometimes I do this to remind myself, like, don't stay the path. It is, and it's always like there's so many things that fall into the category of like it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it becomes like this irresistible, like, oh, let's just do crunch time this week and next week, and then it's like, especially in like a corporate environment, I think people are like, oh, that was really good, like our group looks like we're super productive and maybe we should do it again, and it's like then you're doing it all the time and that's not good. But I think it's better to give people like a, hey, you can come in and work at a reasonable pace where you make less mistakes and don't worry that you're not doing enough.
I've noticed that working in like Germany and factories out there where it's common for people to like only have a couple jobs over their lifetime, unlike here where you might be like jumping jobs a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned from that is what you were saying with like sustainability. Like if every week is crunch week, then like, you know, you're not gonna be at that place forever.
No, even if you want to be, like, eventually you're just going to be like hiding under the desk and like muttering the last thing that you saw in your command line, and they're going to have to wheel you out. So don't do that to yourself. That's, I'm also like, since we were talking about jobs earlier, one of the things, and I'm able to do this because I have not been like without a job for so long that I was like, all right, I'll just take whatever. But I always ask in job interviews, like, oh, so it says a 40-hour work week. Like, how realistic is that? And then, and you can ask it a couple different ways. Like, what about work-life balance? And like, oh, is there like a one time of year where things are a little bit crunched? And if they're like, all times, yeah, whatever, I haven't slept in years, and you're like, cool. But it also kind of, it does you the favor of they can tell you're not like ready to be one of them when you ask about work-life balance and how realistic the 40-hour work week is. So you almost never get called back from a place that gave you a terrible answer to that question. So if you can, steel yourself enough to ask the question, then you won't get the offers for jobs that are going to treat you like that. Sort of. Some places are less aware of their workaholic tendencies than others.
So don't immediately laugh, Greg, when people ask you that.
Yeah.
Oh no, I take it seriously. Yeah, so I want to tack on to that. I walk in as a consultant. I walk into in my own personal experience. I walk into, or have even been, the victim of what I call a hero complex, where so and so always knows how to do this. I don't know how to do this. Just ask so and so, and you end up getting let me Google that for you queries all day long that steal your focus. If somebody steals your focus for 2 seconds, they've got your focus for 30 minutes before you really get back up to speed to do something else, and it just cascades and turns into this giant snowball where all you're doing is being the hero. So that includes, first and foremost, I think, working too much. I'll do this so that we don't fail. Okay, well then you should have failed. Yeah, so that's another thing to look out for, I think.
That's
And if somebody,
one of the things they say or I've said in my Agile presentations, if you have superheroes where you work, you're doing something wrong.
right?
Yeah, like, are you really getting giant blue space aliens like shooting up your workplace? Like,
Right.
maybe move your office so they can't find you anymore.
Yeah, so it's
Terrible.
interesting. Like, if you want to lead, I would highly recommend, and I look forward to the next opportunity to present itself. Maybe I'm being lazy, but lead a group of volunteers. I think you said it.
Mhm.
It's really difficult to be critical to somebody who you're not paying any money.
Yeah.
And it really teaches you how to be humble and how to be more of, I guess, a servant to the people that you're leading, whether you're leading by choice or whether you're leading just by fact, by de facto. But yeah, I think that gives you a great perspective on, like, this person has given me, like, even if it's an hour and a half or a half an hour of their time over the week. They showed up. They were at a place where I couldn't be because I'm going to be all around the state or the country or whatever, and they took that much off my plate. Like, just positive encouragement with that, and just it becomes a challenge to see if you can get somebody to come back. I think because that means that you're a good leader.
I've done a lot of volunteer management. So before I did like free and open source software, I used to work in local politics. And so, we were working on trying to raise the minimum wage in Massachusetts and a bunch of other stuff. And people would come in. It was a long time ago. Like, we actually used to send postcards out to people to let them know what was going on, because not all of our membership was on email yet. And so, we had people coming in and addressing and stamping postcards.
It's huge because it's that thing you don't have to do for 2 hours on Friday night at 6 to 8, right?
Yeah.
Because you've already done Thursday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So if you can get that 2 hours back on a Friday, it's awesome. Our paths are kind of similar there.
Mm-hmm. And making the volunteering fun for people is, like, you can't give people the, like, nobody wants to clean the bathroom. That's not a volunteer task. Just in case anyone if you ever see that going on, like, run. But like, we would be like, oh, there's gonna be like cookies, and we'll get out the big coffee maker and make a big pot of coffee, so it's like we try and make it like camaraderie, fun, like, and then when we'd be out at like our fancier events, like introducing someone to like a local legislator, I'd be like, oh, this is Nancy. She comes in every week without fail to help us with office work. Can you imagine how amazing is that? Anyway, Nancy, this is some legislator or whatever. It's like, but yeah, it's like you have to make sure people get those little intangibles if they're volunteering, because they're not getting cash.
Yeah. So to carry on with that, right? Like, when you volunteer, you get to be something you're not 40 hours a week. So you do something different. Whether you're a student, whether you're reading a book and taking escape that way, you're being something that you're normally not. So I guess the flip side to that is, you have to make the thing you are 40 hours a week appealing as well. People at a company that I used to work with used to call work delightful, and I always thought it was weird, but there's some truth to that. Like, work should be delightful, at least to a certain extent. It can't always be bugs and rainbows, but you should take pride in
it could be.
Yeah. Well, if it's all puppies and rainbows, I guess sign me up, but
They wouldn't have to pay you to be there. Is that how the saying goes?
no, I still want to get paid.
Right. Yeah. Until you're to capitalism or UBI or something.
Rainbows of money, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned getting like that experience through managing volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
I found that if you're in like a larger organization, there might be opportunities to do that with other teams. Like, I've seen that a lot, or been involved with that, where you might be managing people, but like you're not a manager. Like, they don't, like, you're not giving people raises or stuff like that, but like leading teams. And I found that pretty normal in like larger organizations, where you might have the person that handles your payroll that you talk to like once a month, but then you have these other technical managers that you interact with. But yeah, if you're trying to get that sort of management experience, that might be a venue, much like the volunteering things.
Yeah, definitely. It's well, and I think that, like we kind of touched on this at the beginning too, like managing all those things that go with managing are actual skills, and it's and there are people who are willing to talk about all different aspects of it, so it's like taking time as opposed to being like, well, I guess I'll just mess up a bunch of people's work day for months on end until I figure this out. It's like, it might feel scary to ask, like, hey, I want to do some training, I want to take some time to do training on this if you get dropped in. But I think it's recognizing that as a specific skill. I think that reflects well on the kind of company you might want to stay at for a long time. Would be like, yes, managing is a skill as opposed to just something no one wants to do and we churn through.
So speaking of that, one of the things that I was really fortunate with was when I was at a prior place, they actually put supervisors, managers through training.
Mm-hmm.
That was, basically management training. It was but anyway, I mean, so it's like, so you learn things like policy. It's like, do you know that acronym, policy? Does anyone else? No, you don't, because you haven't had the training. It is something that can be taught and learned, but policy is like when it comes to like staffing, planning, organizing, staffing, leading, and controlling. But that's like part of that training was that. And I mean, there's books out there on management and supervision, and there's coursework that you can take, or so I mean, we don't think about that in tech so much. It's just like, hey, you've been doing a great job as a developer, so now we're going to make you a team lead, and we're not going to tell you anything about how to do that other than try and do a good job at it.
Yeah, it's really tricky. Vicky Brisser and I did a talk together on orienteering for managers, which was like, kind of like how to approach it, whether, and we didn't have an acronym. Maybe if we did it again, we would use the acronym, but but yeah, it was basically like looking at what you want to get done, how to get your team like talking to each other in a productive way. It was more focused on that type of thing, and making sure they're like passing work to each other in a way that's not like, passive aggressive or incomplete or non-functional, because that makes then the conversation about like, hey, you passed me this thing, but it wasn't finished or it wasn't the way it's supposed to be, and things like that. Like, and so facilitating those conversations so that people can really work together as a team. He saw it.
Hey, sorry, I think I had it on my calendar an hour late.
Yeah, that's okay. We're still here.
I love the topic of the talk. I need to do it more.
I did a short version of this one at FOSDEM. And then from what I hear, this version will be posted soon, right? Or ish.
Yep.
Soon. Yeah, so that's cool. So you could watch that one too. We were talking about different kinds of like how you learn to, like, once you are doing the thing and then you get hired to manage the thing, how you start trying to break that down and piece it out. Yeah. It's I had also like a lot of interns, which is interesting because they're also really new. So in addition to like you managing them, they also don't know that many things yet.
But they're going really fast.
They might be, depends. Sometimes like I have had interns who just like sit and wait for you to be like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I finished that thing. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let's work on the other thing then. Oh, so it's like giving people like a couple of time sensitive things and like a ongoing thing that they could do whenever, that kind of gets them up to speed on the bigger picture as another way to handle new folks, because stuff that's so that you've already done lots of times. Like they might be like, oh, I had no idea we had so many like that were not in the country, like, or whatever. But you know, this is great. We're almost like half seagull here now.
I noticed that. I was like, huh.
We had our meeting on Monday and Ben mentioned like, hey, I saw that you were listed on the Indy DevOps, and I was like, yep, that's me. So
Well, hopefully from this, folks have been able to identify at least one thing they can take off their plate, be it a meeting or a recurring task or something to get some time back for yourself and that core thing you're supposed to be doing.
Which Slack channel to unsubscribe from?
All of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I only go to IRC now when I'm looking for something. I've been trying to not lurk, because you end up with other people that didn't come there for any reason, and you're also there, so they're like, oh, I see you're in here, like, can I ask you something? And it's like, well, you've already asked me if you can ask me, so now I guess now you might as well. But it can be a big time suck. Yeah. Cool. This is the part where we would normally eat pizza and have beer.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Next time.
We'll pretend.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one. So we talked about, sorry.
Go for it.
Talked about, making sure that, you don't have the single points of failure and stuff. And that's one thing I've always sort of struggled with, is getting so overwhelmed that I don't have time to teach other people how to do the stuff that would make it easier for me to not be overwhelmed. And it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. So what brilliant advice do you have for that, Deb?
Oh, I actually used to do a whole talk about that one, which is how to delegate like a boss, which is basically like by the time you are like you've like eaten up to like 50-60 hour a week, and it's kind of too late, but you still have to do it anyway. The thing about delegating is, well, first, it's not going to help you tomorrow. Like the first thing you delegate to someone who's super new and brand new to your tasks and your systems, the first thing you're going to delegate to them is going to be like this big, just to make sure they can log in and log out without like shutting everything down, practically, right? And then they do that. Okay, great. Like, so then you give them something like this big. This is still not taking hours off your plate. This is still, and so that means you have to kind of plan earlier to delegate. The other thing I would say is, so a great thing that you can do, like maybe you found yourself a little stuck. You did finally find someone that you can delegate a couple things to, but you realize there's no documentation, and they're going to keep coming back in between these little bite-sized bits to ask for more stuff. Have them do the documentation, because if you've already been doing the task 50 or 60 hours a week, like you no longer remember what it's like to not just muscle memory type through all the things and do all the tasks. This new person knows they don't know anything, so they're going to document, and then you turn on the computer and then hit enter again, and then hit enter again, because weirdly you have to do it twice on that page. Who knows why? You don't remember that anymore, but they do. And so they do the documentation, put it in a format like a wiki or some other editable thing, so that the next person you get can update it too, where it's like, we fixed that double entry tapping thing that made no sense, so they can erase that later on. So it kind of like, so you delegate the task, you have the delegatee document the task, And then you can kind of just look through and make sure that they didn't find a weird workaround that exposes your whole operation to the open internet or whatever before you set other people on a task. But, so you're still overseeing them, but you are kind of delegating the delegating, because then the next person that comes in will start with that documentation. And so they won't be starting from scratch. They'll be able to sort of teach themselves how to do the first couple of things. So that's really good. The other thing I would say about delegating is making sure that you're making it really easy for people to ask you questions, that you're like super approachable, because the last thing you want to do is, like, especially if you haven't delegated this task before, is give it to a new person and then have them like fail on step 3, but then be terrified because you gave them 19 steps, but you left one out or something. So they're like, oh no, I messed it up. And it's like, no, I forgot step 3. Sorry about that. So just make sure that you're also super approachable, and just say, like, be really honest, be like, hey, I did my best to kind of give you like the order of operations, but it's been a long time since I was new at this task, so I may have left something out. If that's the case, please just come right back and ask, because it wasn't intentional and it's probably not you. It's because I left something out. So just make it real easy for them to come back and get back on track without sitting around for a long time feeling like they messed it up because they're not smart enough or whatever.
We do a lot of pairing in that situation too.
Yeah.
It's like that we acknowledge that to be able to go fast in the future, we're going to have to slow down a little bit right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it like depends on the task type too. Like, if it's like, do this and then you have a bunch of stuff they should be able to do by themselves, then that might be more like what I was kind of talking about. But if it's like they're gonna every other minute hit something where they're like, well, now what? Well, now what? Well, now, yeah, then you might as well just sit with them.
Yeah, we had a group at work today that we were working on semi-related projects, and we just Zoomed most of the day together, like 3 of us, because we all had different experience in different areas. So, and then we would alternate who was sharing the screen at the time too. So we would try and get some of that knowledge transfer in as well.
Cool.
This helps when you don't know what you're doing too. And I'm guilty of this one. If I don't know what I'm doing, I don't feel like I have anything to give to anybody. And sometimes I don't need that. Sometimes I might need another set of eyes. So just because you're in the leadership position doesn't mean you have to have all the answers all the time. And part of being approachable is looping somebody in.
Yeah.
Who doesn't know as much as you do, but can at least read the documentation and bring up ideas, things that you haven't thought of.
Yeah, or if you're asking them to like kind of scope out something new, you can also say, here's how I would approach this. Do you want to like look into like option A, B, and C and see if you can come back with a recommendation on which one to choose? But telling them like, here's my thought process and how I come up with the next thing we're going to do. Do you want to like practice doing that and then come back and let me know how that process is working for you? So yeah, because sometimes it's something like, especially like I've worked at a lot of small nonprofit organizations, and so you wear a lot of different hats. So sometimes I'm asking someone to help me do something that I don't know how to do yet, but I know what our parameters are, and I know like what's important in our approach to a new task, but I don't actually have time to research it, so I have someone else do it. But then they come back and they're like, here's what I found.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to loop back here a little bit, but your documentation approach, I absolutely love that approach. And I've done that so many times myself as the new person on the project, where everybody's been there and they've been doing it for 3 years. And so now you've got to get up to speed. So, and there's no documentation. So I do all the documentation, and you get it there. And then the team or whoever comes in next has that documentation, and I've been known to do the drive-by markdown linter guy. So
yeah, it's documentation you do when you're new is so much better than documentation you do when you're sick of something.